Welcome to the Higher Ed Jobs Podcast, Ask the Expert Edition. I'm Andy Hibble, the Chief Operating Officer and one of the co-founders of Higher Ed Jobs.
And I'm Kelly Sherwin, the Director of Editorial Strategy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Emilio Ulloa, Associate Diversity Officer for MSI Affairs and Professor of Psychology at San Diego State University. We'll be discussing how early career faculty can prepare for and navigate the tenure process. Dr. Ulloa is a senior higher education administrator, researcher, and consultant with extensive experience across student affairs, academic affairs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. His work focuses on advancing student success, improving campus climate, and helping institutions use data to drive meaningful and lasting change. In addition to his administrative leadership, his research examines interpersonal relationships and the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, which informs his work in policy, culture, and organizational effectiveness. I also want to mention that Emilio recently wrote a piece for us on Higher Ed Jobs titled Navigating the Make It or Break Third Year Review, which dives deeper into this topic. So thank you, Emilio, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So as we mentioned, this is an Ask the Expert episode. So we are going to be addressing a question that a listener submitted. So the question is, what advice do you have for tenure-track faculty as they prepare for and navigate the Make It or Break It third year review? Emilio, what are your thoughts on this?
The first thought is actually only sort of tangential to answering the question. I sort of, in all humility, want to share that I hadn't really heard it phrased that way before. And I don't know if maybe I'm lucky or sort of selective hearing, blissfully ignorant. But I think if I had, I might have freaked out a little bit more than I already was in the tenure process. But I think that's important for me to share because my experience notwithstanding, I think that my advice for the reader is that, that third review at its best, it really functions more as like a continued diagnostic appraisal. And what I mean by that is by the third year, there's enough data in your package that you've been sharing, speaking as an empirical scientist here, that you actually can glean really good information from the feedback that's happening in the letters that you're getting, in this process. And so it's really a good place to make a good determination about whether you're on track, about whether there are adjustments that you might need to make, or whether you should stay in a particular lane and continue down because it's working. And really using the information that you have available, both in the formal process, but also in the informal process to ask yourself, am I reading this right? Are they saying I'm on track? Are they saying I might need to work a little harder in this particular area? Or am I communicating to the committees the importance of my work and what its impact is? I know it, but maybe I'm not explaining that to my readers as well as I should.
Emilio, thank you for actually starting out with addressing the make it or break it, because I'm assuming, being that far along, it's already a stressful process. So if you kind of add that extra, like, oh my gosh, if I don't make it, I'm going to be a failure, is definitely not helpful to the process. So I liked how you started out with that explanation.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that the first part you talked about was kind of the make it or break it, quote unquote, part of the question, which really for me resonates in so many different things in a career path. And this is obviously unique to a faculty career path, but it can apply to anything. It can apply to just looking at positions. When you start putting so much pressure there in elevating this, the first part I always think about is everything that goes up must come down. You have to de-escalate that. And looking at this, the only two things in this instance that I see, you have no control over what happens because of this. But what you do have control over is the ability to put your best self and your best work forward and concentrating on that. And I really enjoyed the article because it seemed to concentrate on those things. And what I would say, it kind of really reminds me about so much of this seems to be a lesson in taking feedback. Do you see points, like I would hate to wait 3 years and get feedback? Like being a parent, you quickly learn that you're going to get feedback from a young child on a very regular, if not minute by minute basis of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong.
That's right.
And waiting 3 years to get feedback really seems like something that would be challenging. And I realize that people aren't doing that. This is more of that that deep diagnostic test, which I really liked. I kind of thought like, oh, this is the 3-year, 36,000 mile tune up that you have to get with your car. But before that, you're getting oil changes. And with those oil changes, are there things that you can be doing proactively that there's less surprises at the 3-year mark that help you be better prepared for the feedback you're going to get to fine tune what you're doing?
I think that's really the message here, in particular, is that it's this dual approach, right? One of them is like, you can only control certain things. I really love the way you articulated that, because I would lean into that a little bit as well. And also that information is data. And I think most faculty, consider themselves researchers, scientists, investigators, and that's a language that resonates with them. And if they frame it that way, I think it's really helpful, because you can't control what the membership of your tenure committee is going to be. You can't control what's going on with your department chair any particular year. And you can't control what's going on with the provost, right? But what you can control is what that process looks like from your perspective. So you can control, and not just the work you do, which I think that's the part that I feel I've heard really frustrates faculty oftentimes, is they say, I'm trying. I don't know what else I can do. And you realize there are a lot of other articulation points where you can figure out what you can do, right? And that is first of all, in terms of trying to understand the information for what it is. What are people saying? What are they implying? Why would they have that perspective? And also sharing your materials outside of this particularly focused process. You have colleagues, you have folks from other departments that you've met, folks from other universities that you know in your discipline. And I've come to the conclusion that the folks who are really the ones that lean into this idea that this is the make or break, that this is evaluative, they're also the ones who feel like they need to perfect their materials and keep them private until they reveal them to people. And that's, I think, how you not only perpetuate this idea that it's make or break, but also you have really turned off the opportunity to get constant feedback along the way. You've turned off data. And I don't know about y'all, but data is good. Data helps us understand. Data helps us course correct. I mean, that's the part that I think is really cool. The other piece that I think is really important that people don't realize, they don't remember. They realize, but they don't remember, is that when you're in this, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? You know your discipline, you know what your articles are, you know what you've been focusing on, and you assume everybody else gets it, or they know why this particular article is important. And they know, why you've tried to be a first author in, Nature or in this sort of landmark APA journal. But as soon as it goes outside your department level, no one else understands that unless you tell them why it's important. And you won't know which things will miss or not miss unless you're getting feedback from people outside of your discipline and outside of your department. And so I just think that a lot of that stuff comes full circle, and it's reciprocal in nature. But it's the personal piece for me is about perspective. I think we tend to do well when we frame things constructively. And Andrew, I just want to say, like, what you said resonated with me very much, in that understanding this process as data and feedback and as helpful is really the way to go, because that framing is something you absolutely have under your control.
You have a wonderful quote. You were talking about what you needed to do, and you said it was how I was writing about that work that was important in this process, which kind of struck another nerve for me. And I'd like to point out here, when I talk about humility, I think people talk about acting humble, whereas I think that humility is actually a practice. It's not an action. You work on understanding your place in this spaceship Earth that we live in. So I think I might need to give Disney a trademark reference there. Pull that mic if we have some IP issues with that. But where we are here, like, find your place and be who you are. But this is one of those interesting areas. If you practice humility, it's really hard to tell your story with the truth that you need to in instances like this. You can't hold back. You can't do those things. Can you offer any thoughts on that? Because I do think there's a discomfort in being able to tell your story objectively with humility.
Yeah. And I do like the distinction that you made. Folks think that humility is, in fact, like sort of saying things that don't sound arrogant. But what I think you're leaning into, and I think it's helpful for folks listening to this, is that humility is being open to positive change and to constructive criticism. And you can balance it with pride. You can have pride and humility. You can be proud of your work. You can be proud of your work ethic. You can be proud of your accomplishments. But you can also say, in this process and in life in general, what else can I be doing? What am I saying? And how is it landing? How can I be better at these things? How can I serve people better? And if you're always open to that possibility, the logical consequences, you are going to get better. Plus, just, we talk about well-being often at the university and how stressful our jobs are. And I think that leaning into that humility is one of the best ways to practice a wellness. It's you don't let things get to you as much. You don't take them personally. You try to understand where other folks might be coming from, and you realize when someone says something to you, it might have a sting at first, but it's more about them than it is about you. And you have an opportunity to maybe glean something good from it that'll make you a better person, a better professor, a better researcher, a better teacher, something. Yeah. That perspective shift is just critical to the process, to being better, and just maintaining some degree of sanity in this crazy
Yeah,
world.
I could see that. I really, really like that, because I think if I can give a shorthand for it, when pride works in service of humility, it's working well. But when pride leads, humility can tend to be left behind. And in this process, that is not something that benefits you in your career if pride is leading the humility.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one of the things I remember in my journey that I tell graduate students and sort of junior colleagues is when I first started, I went to a university that was a large state school, and I was a smart kid and I did really well, but I was a big fish in a small pond. I went to graduate school and everybody was brilliant. And I had a mentor who was, I assume in retrospect, trying to teach me how to write like a professor, like a researcher. But it just tore me apart every time I got her feedback. I, read all over the page, and I was reading it as, you aren't that good. You weren't ready for this. That sort of thing. And I'm not sure where it happened, maybe with the help of some friends and perhaps a little bit of psychological intervention. But at some point you realize, wait, she's trying to make me better. And I need to pay attention to it like that in order to get there. And I had been told, like, you need to have thick skin when you're an academic. You're going to have 10 times more rejections on your work and criticisms of your methodology and your ideas than you will have successes. And if you let each one of those cut into you, it's not death by 1,000 cuts. It's just death. And I think the switch in sort of saying it's not really about having thick skin. It's about allowing those things to help me grow. And it just switches your mentality. And I learned how to be a much better researcher with that shift. And I'm really grateful for the folks who helped me understand that. But it was, in all honesty, it didn't happen right away. It took some time. And I do my best to try and tell folks who are newer in this game about that experience and not just when it's coming from me, if it's my own graduate student, but like in general, in the process of trying to get your writing out, in teaching evaluations. Oh, wow. I mean, that's a place where, words can sting.
Well, thank you, Emilio. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful place for us to put an exclamation point on this conversation. And if you're listening and you have more questions like the one Emilio just answered, or you've had questions for Emilio or thoughts about this conversation, please feel free to send them to us at podcast@higheredjobs.com, or feel free to send us a direct message on X at higheredcareers. Thank you, Emilio, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for making it kind of fun. I appreciate it.
And thank you for listening. And we look forward to talking with you again real soon.